As you know, the Taliban attacked the city of Kunduz on September 28th. Afghan security forces have been fighting to remove the insurgents ever since. Unfortunately, the Taliban have decided to remain in the city and fight from within, knowingly putting civilians at significant risk of harm. We have now learned that on October 3rd, Afghan forces advised that they were taking fire from enemy positions and asked for air support from U.S. forces. An airstrike was then called to eliminate the Taliban threat, and several civilians were accidentally struck. This is different from the initial reports, which indicated that U.S. forces were threatened and that the airstrike was called on their behalf.
And welcome back to Daily Wrap. That was U.S. Army General John Campbell today addressing the airstrike that struck a hospital run by Doctors Without Borders in Afghanistan over the weekend, killing 22 people. The general went on to say that 3 investigations are currently underway and, quote, if errors were committed, we'll acknowledge them. We'll hold those responsible accountable and will take steps to ensure mistakes are not repeated. President Obama released a statement Sunday saying, and we quote, the Department of Defense has launched a full investigation. We will await the results of that inquiry before making a definitive judgment as to the circumstances of this tragedy. But why isn't this story leading in the headlines? And is the mainstream media giving the Obama administration a pass here? The New York Times completely rewrote and changed the title of its report on the bombing, get this, 7 times. Early on October 3rd, the New York Times published an article, and it was headlined this: airstrike hits hospital in Afghanistan, killing at least 9 people. Minutes later, it changed the headline to airstrike hits Doctors Without Borders hospital in Afghanistan. Let's turn the page again to headline number 3, Afghan hospital hit by airstrike, Pentagon says. How about number 4? U.S. investigates after bombs hit Afghan hospital. And how about number 5? U.S. is blamed after bombs hit Afghan hospital. CNN also has been blamed for downplaying the event. Did the media try to shield the White House from this major screw-up? Let's go to a former media-iter, if that's a word, himself, Noah Rothman, who knows a thing or two about these sort of situations.
What those headlines were indicative of is a newsroom that is getting bombarded by an agency just raising Cain over the nature of the report, the nature of the headline, trying to do their best to massage the story to a favorable direction towards them, wrestling with the newsroom's instincts to obviously want to report the facts. I don't necessarily think that the national press is covering up for this in a way that they wouldn't have necessarily if George Bush was in office. True, this would be leading the headlines for the next week if it was Bush in office, as opposed to Barack Obama, who has made a name for himself as trying to end these wars. But the reality of it is that these wars aren't going to end. They're not going to end on Barack Obama's watch. We are going to be in Iraq. We are going to be in Afghanistan with a substantial presence. What I'm afraid of is that these Afghan airstrikes were called in by, for what we understand, actual Afghans who are on the ground. That raises the prospect that this is going to continue to happen until and unless we move in actual U.S. sighters to sight these targets and direct the munitions where they need to go, which means we're going to have to continue to ramp up these campaigns. I think that's what the New York Times might be afraid of.
Rick, we're coming up now on 14 years. Think about that. 14 years since we first went into Afghanistan in 2001. Do you think the news media, besides, okay, yeah, I agree with Noah that if this were a Bush administration, it would be played more for whatever reason, but that this is also numbness, that after 14 years when these things happen, another airstrike hit where it shouldn't have, and some people that shouldn't have been killed got killed, and it's not a domestic story, so therefore it's not going to get as much play.
It's a darn good question. Look, and I do have to say this, you know, I'm open to the idea certainly that if Bush were still the president, it would get bigger play, but remember, there was a lot of big news going on these past 3 days,
well, that's true,
including a 1,000-year rainstorm that was killing people and stuff right here in the Carolinas.
I would argue the school shooting also
was.
Shooting was
certainly
did. Day and a half after
so I don't think we should leap to that conclusion, but I'm not going to castigate anybody for suggesting it. I get it. Yeah, you know what? In the same way that we were talking the other night about how we've grown numb to these college shootings. 14 years, yeah, we shouldn't grow numb. This is a huge story. It is a terrible mistake, just a terrible, terrible, terrible mistake. But I like your suggestion. I hadn't thought about it, but it makes sense. We are growing numb.
Bill, do you think it's a matter of supply and demand as well? In other words, and it's kind of a weird way to put it, but the American public just doesn't care about things that don't affect them directly. And in this case, this was in a northern part of Afghanistan, and Doctors Without Borders, I mean, these people are you know, salt of the earth as far as what they're doing. But domestic stories now always seem to trump the international ones.
Well, you know, I think it's a combination of a couple of things. As you suggested, there is a numbness. We've been there for 14 years, and there is a numbness to this. I'm happy that the media is not playing this as hard as they would, I believe, under George W. Bush, because it also cuts the military a little bit of a break here until we find out exactly what happened. But to your question, all news is local. And as Rick mentioned, we have a 1,000-year flood going on down in South Carolina. We have people being evacuated, losing power, losing their lives, and we got a school shooting in Oregon.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to prioritize in these situations. And look, there always will be some sort of bias in media. I believe that, but in this case, I think there were some reasons that justify it not being the lead in this situation. Okay, so do you think the mainstream media is spinning the airstrike story? Go to newsmaxtv.com/comments. Let your voice be heard. May read a couple of those comments later in the show. But up next, we're talking to CEO and founder of Politicon. Fun stuff. Simon City, join us.